WWE had a good showing over the last week in the build-up and the execution of SummerSlam. In many ways, it was the start of a new era for the company, with Triple H taking charge of creative after Vince McMahon retired from his role as WWE Chairman and head of creative on a permanent basis. With Vince McMahon taking time away finally, the focus could change, and that's exactly what has happened. This is Wrestling Hub. We're talking about what WWE told us on their programming in the last week. Before we get into the rest of the video, make sure you subscribe to Wrestling Hub and turn on all notifications to stay up to date with everything in the world of pro wrestling. Also, don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Wrestling Hub Official and follow us on Twitter at Wrestling_Hub. Last year at SummerSlam, Becky Lynch returned to programming after a long hiatus because she was giving birth to her and Seth Rollins' child. Upon her return, fans had been waiting to see her become the star that she was always supposed to be, the big babyface in the women's division. Instead, she returned in the middle of a segment that had originally been scheduled for Sasha Banks. While Banks was out, anyone else could have competed against Bianca Belair on that night, but WWE decided that instead of returning Lynch as a babyface that everyone had been hoping for, they would play around with how they presented her instead. Thus, Lynch returned, beat up Carmella, and immediately challenged Belair to a title match. With Belair hardly ready, she attacked her and hit her with the manhandle slam to get the win in a matter of 26 seconds. The same fans who had been cheering her return only minutes before were left booing and unhappy with how the company had treated Belair. One of the women they felt was the future of the company's women's division. Over the last year, she portrayed one of the biggest heels in the women's division. Her feud with Belair was never ending, as was her quest to get back to the heights she had been before. Now though, over the course of this last week, things changed altogether. She faced Bianca Belair at SummerSlam and lost the match after a huge struggle. Unlike other times, she didn't throw a temper tantrum after the match was done. Instead, she approached Belair, shook her hand and hugged her, showing respect in the way the old Becky Lynch could. Thus, it was an immediate character change for her, only becoming better when she stood next to Belair when the latter was threatened. As if that was not enough, she cemented it. Lynch has changed her name back to The Man on Twitter, and during Raw, she addressed fans, saying that she had finally found her way back. She delivered a fiery babyface promo, and while she will be out for a while due to injury, her character change will help establish her for when she does come back. It should be noted that with WWE having Bayley's faction attack her, it might be a long time before Lynch is seen. WWE confirmed she would be out for months. This injury was similar to the one Finn Balor suffered before. Lynch could be out for at least 2 to 3 months before she returns at Survivor Series or in the build-up to the Royal Rumble. Bayley's return to WWE was one of the biggest news coming out of SummerSlam. However, that was not the only thing that happened. Along with Bayley's return, 2 other top stars made their proper main roster debuts. Former NXT Women's Champion Io Shirai made her main roster debut alongside Bayley, but it would be under the name Io Sky. Also making their main roster debut was none other than Dakota Kai. She had been a part of the company for a long time and was one of the most well-loved stars in NXT, but she would eventually leave. Now with Triple H in charge, she's back and part of the most high-profile female faction in the company. Kai's return in Io Shirai's debut might be very significant to note because of what it implies. Kai was also apparently in talks with AEW, but her WWE return shows her in a different light. Fightful reports that she had interest from multiple companies. However, her talks with AEW are said to have never picked up much after the 2 parties had been introduced. It was also noted that members of AEW's roster had pushed for her to join, but the reason for the talks breaking down remains unknown. Now, even with the changes going through the company, one thing is clear: Bayley is here and she means business. And thanks to the changes that Triple H has brought with him, so are 2 of the best women stars. Their appearances mean so much more for the future because for a long time, stars coming up from NXT have not been treated well. In fact, most have been buried completely. Now, with Triple H being the one in charge, things might change very fast, and stars coming from NXT to the main roster might finally be utilized like they always should have been. The coming months will show if this is indeed the case. recent era of wrestling has all been about the evolution of the wrestling scene. Wrestling has always been the focus of AEW ever since its inception, and even with the many storylines, the focus has always been on the wrestling and less on the entertainment side of things. It was the opposite in WWE back in the days of the Attitude Era. While wrestling was definitely important, as seen in Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, or Kurt Angle matches, it was not the only focus. The matches were often overbooked and things happened that made the nights memorable beyond anything anyone could forget that night. The Stone Cold bleeding till he passed out against Bret Hart, The Undertaker throwing Mankind from the top of the cell, Edge spearing Mick Foley through a flaming table, Shawn Michaels hitting the elbow on Mr. McMahon while the latter is in a trash can, Brock Lesnar breaking the ring by hitting the superplex on the Big Show. There are many such moments that have been played again and again over the last decades. In the recent era of wrestling, there have been very few such moments created by WWE, perhaps with the exception of Goldberg defeating Brock Lesnar in seconds after his return. However, that changed at SummerSlam. In the main event, Brock Lesnar was facing Roman Reigns in their last ever match. The two men went at it, and Lesnar in particular changed things up by driving out the tractor to the ring. While he used it as a launch pad to jump on Reigns in the first half of the bout, he would be using it in a way that no one foresaw. After being unable to keep Reigns down for the 10 count, the frustrated Lesnar headed to the tractor. He backed it up and rammed the ring with it. Not done, he then used the arm to pick up the entire corner of the ring, sending Reigns tumbling. While there have been instances of the ring breaking in the past, there's never been a moment like this. It ensured it was the biggest moment that everyone talked about when they spoke about SummerSlam, and was a moment that will be replayed again and again. Every wrestling fan who has seen a few shows in the last few years knows that when it comes to WWE commentary, there have been a lot of problems in the past. The commentary is insipid. The same old terms are thrown around again and again, the catchphrases are stupid, and generally, it is enough to drive someone away from watching a show simply because of how boring it is. The embodiment of this problem was none other than Michael Cole. He was the veteran commentator, and instead of creating memorable moments like Jim Ross did when he was at the desk, he shouted the big dog or boss time again and again. It was not his fault either, since by now it's well known that Vince McMahon is in the ears of the commentary team throughout the show, and they are not the ones making the decisions about what to say all the time, thanks to the micromanaging from the former chairman. Now with Vince gone, the difference is there for all to see. The commentary team even implied that Michael Cole was more free, with Corey Graves bringing it up and Cole saying that he was no longer restricted by anything or anyone. As a result, the commentary in the main event of SummerSlam and even during other matches was excellent and helped make the show feel bigger. This was also seen in the way Tommaso Ciampa was booked during this week's Raw. Instead of just being another face in the crowd, he was able to stand out and show why he was one of the top stars on NXT. He defeated AJ Styles and earned the opportunity to become the next big star on the main roster. This was very promising and shows that despite him being booked badly until SummerSlam, the internal changes are happening. He might become one of the top stars on the main roster soon if this continues, given he's already proven during his time in NXT just how good he is. A report by Fightful also stated the same. Ciampa has received positive reviews from his peers and staff for his work with The Miz, his willingness to embrace the role, and his attitude backstage since he was brought to Raw. One source said that his demeanor has been great, and he's worked hard to make the most out of everything presented to him under Vince when he didn't even originally plan to ever be on Raw or SmackDown. In addition, as you can imagine, Ciampa's promo with Miz turned a lot of heads and impressed several people backstage. Drew McIntyre and Sheamus are well-known stars, and they are two who have been feuding against each other week after week, month after month. But now perhaps it can be safely said that the feud is behind them. The two faced each other in an old-fashioned Donnybrook match. The match ended with McIntyre putting Sheamus out of his misery with the Claymore and taking the win. After the bout, Theory attacked Drew, starting a new feud with him. Even at SummerSlam, McIntyre addressed that he would be challenging the winner of the Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns match at Clash at the Castle, and didn't talk about Sheamus. This was a feud that everyone was well and truly tired of by this point, so it seems that the company has finally made the decision to move on from there, and are looking at their next goal for McIntyre, who is finally back in talks for the title. Whether he wins the belt or not at the pay-per-view remains to be seen, but it's the most promising update in a long time. And this was what WWE told us through programming in the last week. I hope you're all having a great day. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later.